Welcome back to Summer School and Social 31, and today we are going to look at 4 lessons as a combined package. Lessons 22, 23, 24, and 25. And the takeaway here, when you're done, is that you should recognize that democracy is challenged. So similar to what we see in this cartoon is that democracy in the United States is not completely broken, but it needs some maintenance. It needs someone to respond to some of the flaws, some of the structural flaws that, if addressed, could make this vehicle so much better. So the first part, we want you to be able to understand some terms like populism, racism, alienation, electoral systems, apathy, and corruption. And we want you to link those terms to actual case studies and be able to recognize the language and connections to those case studies within some A1 sources. Ultimately, too, you should be able to, in the future, write an A2 essay, and in that essay, attempt to address some of these flaws of democracy. So one of the flaws is the rise of populism. And what is populism? Populism, I like to relate back to ancient Rome, when some of the senators would show some actual credibility, I guess, to their voice, to their agenda by saying, I'm speaking for the people. Look how many thousands of people cheer my name and are cheering for the change that I'm offering. So what the politicians were doing is they would manipulate the emotions of the people. And we've seen some of this in America of Donald Trump, that he was manipulating the anti-immigrant, xenophobic emotions of the people. To make America great again, we need to protect domestic industry. To make America great again, we need to defend our border against waves of refugees. And it's that idea that, the people fear this. I'm giving them a solution, so I'm just an instrument to the people. That's populism. So here's a cartoon that is linking the agenda of populism and that make America great again to the idea of imprisoning people in a death camp. This gate is similar to the one at Auschwitz. And Auschwitz was one of those camps that were used to not only marginalize but to exterminate the Jewish people. And this cartoonist is suggesting in 2018, Donald Trump's America, is that America, by excluding some people on the wrong side of the border, they're condemning them to a life worth less. So the issue here in America is that although the UN does declare universal mobility rights, America is saying our country's full, that we are overpopulated, that we cannot support thousands or millions of new Americans every year. And add to this the additional complexity that will begin in late 2019, but more so in 2020, is that we're not just excluding people at the border because of the fear of adding too many people, but what about adding dangerous elements like COVID-19? So is it not the pertinent or reasonable thing to limit the traffic of people into your country? Well, the Canada-US border has been closed for the last 15 months due to a fear of COVID itself. So this cartoon after 2019 and 2020's COVID-19 has become even more relevant. Looking back, some could argue that the birth of America was based on populism, that it's the idea of rugged American individualism, and that America could be the land of opportunity for all individuals. That's what that cartoon is suggesting. This cartoon takes it into a different direction and saying that, when we allow our emotions to determine the way we see the world, they're suggesting that this populism, anti-immigration, xenophobic idea is isolating us. We're putting ourselves on a deserted island, a mental one, where we have excluded so many groups that we become the castaway, right? We become the castaway here. Now, this is how you're going to be tested on it. So on a multiple choice test, I may give you a source like this and say, similar to Germany in 1932, America is becoming polarized. We have the left and the right and very few people in the middle. That's what this cartoon is saying, that we have radicals on the left, reactionaries on the right, and in America, in the streets, often it looks like civil war. And the moderate people in the middle, they're becoming less and less. So the voice of moderation, the non-violent voice in the middle, is becoming less and less. And the argument is that in America we're seeing, more tendency to violence. An interesting note here is that there is some argument that the marginalization that is being felt on the left is also being felt on the right. So this individual, this man, was being attacked at a university in the United States because he has a Make America Great Again hat on. And he represents a religious right group called Freedom Bank. And people were attacking him, and he's saying, well, wait a minute, you guys want more tolerance in society. Well, you need to tolerate me too. I'm also a minority group. I'm a Christian. I'm an American. I'm a white male. But if you attack my beliefs and don't allow for a place within society for them, then that's intolerance. That liberal people who are saying over here, we want tolerance for plurality, over here you're saying we will not tolerate your beliefs in your religion. He's saying that's a hypocrisy. You're being hypocrites. And he's saying, stop liberal intolerance. And again, it's an interesting perspective, because typically liberals are attacking intolerance. That conservatives are the ones that they would argue are being intolerant. But here it's the conservatives that are saying, no, you're being intolerant of me. Racism and race relations are another challenge that America and Canada as a democracy is struggling with. So a democracy, mathematically, is ruled by the majority. And rule by the majority opens you up to a tyranny where the majority is tyrannical towards minorities. And historically in Canada, we have racism against minority groups. We have targeted Japanese Canadians, Chinese Canadians in the past. We've targeted Canada's First Nations many times and attempted to assimilate them. In America, African Americans feel targeted, and racism has been a recurring theme for generations there, as we looked at in a previous lesson about the civil rights timeline. And that's what this source is saying, that America has unlocked so much economic power. Now the next challenge is to unlock our social potential. That racial injustice is the next obstacle. Well, we need to eliminate poverty. That's an economic concern. But we also need to eliminate racial injustice. And what role does the U.S. president, in this case 1964 Lyndon B. Johnson, have to lead the people in this battle? Is it freedom through government? Can we only see our full potential, become a great society, when we are legislated and educated and regulated by the state to see the toxins within society of racial injustice? Here is the America that LBJ was reacting to. Here's an America that in the 1950s was equating race mixing, desegregation, with communism. And at that time, communism was the great big bad because we were engaged in a ideological civil war against communism. So here, elements of conservative America, they were equating race mixing, desegregation in places like schools following Brown versus the Board of Education with communism to try to get support for the Jim Crow laws to continue to exist. They're saying if we get rid of Jim Crow society in America, it's basically communism. Yeah. So this cartoon is saying that this caused LBJ to do this, but we still have this. Even though LBJ talked about a great society back in 1964, prejudice, discrimination, and bigotry is the race we still struggle with. So when you are a hurdle runner, like myself, obviously I'm an Olympic athlete, I run hurdles all the time, I'm so great at everything, but when you do hurdles, it's easier to jump them than to run through them and carry them with you. Just a little tip for you hurdlers out there. So this America, this Uncle Sam that's drawn here, the symbol of America, he could be a lot faster and he could achieve victory. And the victory would be the full potential of America, right? So the full potential of America could be unlocked socially if instead of dragging all of this baggage of prejudice, discrimination, and bigotry that continues in the hearts and minds of Americans today, if they could overcome them. how do you overcome bigotry and racism and discrimination? Do you legislate it? Do you regulate it? Do you educate it? How do you eliminate racism within society? That's an issue in America that is as prevalent as poverty. There is a social poverty in America, as long with the economic and political poverty. So we talk about alienation. What is alienation? It's marginalizing. It's to take value away. It's to exclude things. So in Canada, we have a history of alienating Canada's First Nations. And it's very targeted. When you look at Canada's relationship between our federal government and our Indigenous peoples through the Indian Act, there was a systemic response that was designed to assimilate and to destroy a culture. And that destruction of culture is a definition of alienation, that we don't have room in Canada for your culture. When that message is sent, that's alienation. So there have been many attempts in Canada's history to alienate. Now, have there been attempts to deal with the legacy of it? For sure there have been. That's the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But as this cartoonist is showing, that vehicle went nowhere. That although the vehicle could be a vehicle that was designed to actually achieve the destiny of truth and reconciliation, it's missing. There's some flaws here. It's missing tires, right? So by design, it could have gone there. If you add some tires, then maybe it would have gone there. But also a big part of this is the government was talking lots, but listening little. So had this vehicle been designed to listen instead of talk, and had some tires so that it could move instead of stagnate, then maybe Canada would achieve truth and reconciliation. But we don't have truth and reconciliation today. And there are many great quotes in here by Harold Cardinal talking about that challenge within democracy in Canada's history, a challenge that included an attempt to assimilate and to homogenize Canada's Indigenous people rather than to honor their beauty. Now, how does this marginalization manifest itself in 2021? Hashtag boil no more. Hashtag boil no more is this idea that there's, about 50 Canadian communities, primarily First Nations communities, that need to boil their water because they don't have clean water. This is a first world country that doesn't have clean water. And in 2015, hopeful Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made this an election promise. He said, if elected, I will make sure you get clean water. 6+ years later, they don't have clean water. Hashtag boil no more. Electoral systems. One of the biggest challenges within Canada's system is the way we count our votes. So in Canada, we have something called first past the post. And that's like it's been often referred to as having horse races. So we have ridings, and each riding is like a horse race. So there once was 272 ridings, then 280, and then 295, and then I think we're at 335 today. So we have about 335 ridings, 335 horse races. But let's say hypothetically, that the Conservatives get 26% of the vote in every riding. The Liberals get 25, the NDP get 25, and the Green get 24. Well, you could have the Conservatives win all of the seats in the House of Commons and only have 26% of the vote. And that is a distortion of the will of the people, and it is a flaw within the system. And in many ridings, it discourages people from voting. Here in the Wetaskiwin riding, if you are a non-conservative voter, you might say, well, what's the chances my candidate gets elected? Very little. I'm not even going to bother to go line up and vote because my vote won't be heard. So there is a reform in place that is possible, and that would be to use proportional representation. So if a party gets 40% of the seats, they should get 40% of... Sorry, if a party gets 40% of the vote, then they should get 40% of the seats. Next up is apathy, which can be the manifestation of having an electoral system that is flawed. Apathy is when it appears that people don't care. A measurement, a manifestation of that would be low voter turnout. How can we deal with apathy is the topic of, wait for it, this TED Talk. 7 minutes long, very good. Make a long story short, the TED Talk says it's the way government communicates with the people. Best Buy sends out these beautiful flyers to invite you to come in and buy new big screen TVs because they want you to be included in that event. While government communicates what's on their docket, on their agenda, very differently because they want to exclude you from that event. We are marginalized by government, which creates apathy because of the way government communicates with us. They communicate us in a way that's not inviting, not enticing, and therefore very marginalizing. Next up and last up, we have the idea of corruption. And the idea of corruption is going to come up again in lesson 25. So I'm going to jump from lesson 22 to lesson 25. And the idea is that how can we hold government accountable if they're not transparent? Well, we can't. But once they are transparent, what do we do if we look in and we see scandals? Well, in order to really begin to wrestle with that, we need to understand, well, what are these scandals that we can see? So we have a list of scandals in Canada's history, and unfortunately, it's not a short list. It is not a short list. So I would argue that as we begin to attempt to address the scandals, the flaws of the Canadian system, it'd be nice for you to be able to speak specifically to some of the scandals that we suffer today. And you can see that there were a few historically, but recently we're seeing more and more scandals. Maybe that's because the media is performing its job of being a watchdog, or maybe it's just because we have more corrupt politicians. Next up, I want you to understand what a lobby group is. A lobby group is an organized group of individuals that make policy-related appeals to government. So an example is Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. Could be a vehicle to promote democracy. This could make democracy better. But the problem is when a lobby group, instead of just promoting a policy that could make democracy better, becomes so powerful that it ends up getting an undue amount of influence. So a lobby group with an enormous amount of backing behind it may be able to circumvent the normal procedures to get government's attention at the expense of other citizens. So these citizens, although enjoying some fruit of democracy, this lobby group, because it has money behind it, it's getting to pick a lot more fruit. So it's a metaphor about how, due to the amount of power that some lobby groups or NGOs have, they have too much ability to shape government policy. If lobby groups would provide information for elected officials, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers are saying this is what you need to know about drunk driving. If lobby groups mobilize voters, then these two things combined make them look more democratic. But they become a challenge to democracy when they begin to overwhelm the voice of the will of the people to the extent that government doesn't listen to the people, they only listen to certain lobby groups. And then finally, we look at the media. The media could be a pillar of a functional democracy, like this cartoon is suggesting. That could be a cornerstone for an expression of the true will of the people. But what we're seeing is that that cornerstone is collapsing. Why is it collapsing? Well, gone are the days, it appears, of watchdog journalism. Here's a link that looks at some of the key moments in watchdog journalism history. Moments like Upton Sinclair when he wrote about the jungle and he inspired the progressive era and a shift to modern liberalism. That's watchdog journalism. Watchdog journalism like the Watergate scandal that exposes flaws within government. But what we see instead today are journalists that aren't trying to promote, try to create a better America in the future. What they're doing is promoting a very specific agenda. So because corporations are owning the media is not free. Media is now controlled by corporations, and therefore rather than being a pillar of a democracy, a cornerstone of accountability, instead they are there to further a very specific agenda. So Rupert Murdoch owns Fox News. He's a billionaire. There's certain things that he'd like government to pass and certain things he wouldn't. So, for example, in The Investigators, in the corporation video, what we learn is that Fox News had Monsanto as one of its key advertisers, and they just bought millions of dollars of ad space. And he had on Fox News, Rupert Murdoch had a new show called The Investigators, and the investigators, these watchdog journalists, they found that Monsanto had created a product, RBGH, that was leading to mastitis in cows and could potentially be harmful for human consumers. And therefore, they thought it was in the public's best interest to know about this. So they wanted to air an episode saying, hey, be careful of these milk products because they contain RBGH, a product made by Monsanto that could be harmful to humans. And Fox News said to the investigators, don't air that, because if you do, Monsanto is going to pull their ad space on our recently purchased Fox Media outlets, and that's going to cost us millions of dollars. So what that is an example of putting the profit ahead of the collective interest. And that's why the media is no longer an instrument of accountability and a watchdog, because their interests are now self-serving rather than serving the collective. And that, my friends, is a look at challenges within democracy. So we have many flaws that if we address, the vehicle that is democracy could become even greater.